Hello, Pittsburgh.
How are things in Little Rock, Dave? It's podcast o'clock.
It's my favorite time of the week.
It is. This is when it all happens. This is the time that across America, maybe the world, I haven't looked at the listenership, but people are waiting to hear what we've got for them. And they particularly want to know, is Dave Anderson going to have a smart opening question to kick this whole thing off?
Oh, absolutely. It's especially smart because you wrote it. And that is, when was the last time you listened to music because you read a critic review as opposed to like fan opinion sharing or whatever?
Yeah. And I it's been a little while. I've occasionally read reviews of things because I will sometimes like want to listen to something and want to listen to something new. So I'll go look for a review and try and read something. It's been a long time since I've found something that I then listened to and really fell in love with the band. The last one was probably Being Steered Towards Big Thief. And that was like, at least 5 years ago. So.
All right. Well, I too must confess that I do not recall being sent towards a musical selection based on a critic review, but I do think it's probably one of those things where it happens more than you realize, and then you think you discovered it yourself because everyone always thinks they discovered it themselves.
That may be. We'll delve into that more because it is time for me to welcome people to StupidGenXTricks, the show for people who used to be cool. It is episode 8. What did the critics say and why the hell do they bother?
Yep, and we're going to be having that conversation with a great guest, my childhood neighbor and grade school buddy, Mark Richardson, who is not on this because of childhood history. Well, in part he is, but most of all because he is a big shot in the world of music writing, having been the former editor-in-chief of Pitchfork, the highly influential indie music blog, and writing now for the Wall Street Journal. So, David, you were saying you don't read too much music criticism.
I don't, but I'll go to Pitchfork. I'll go to, there's a blog I like called No Depression, which covers kind of the, Americana music scene. And I'll often go because I have this kind of desire that's embedded in me to not be the old guy who only listens to music from when he was a kid, but who is still discovering new stuff. So I'll actually just like go to Pitchfork and look up their, best albums of the year so far kind of thing and try to decide from reading that, what of these things might I like, and I'll plug things in. And I have enjoyed things more recently than 5 years ago, I guess. For me, and I don't know if you have a similar drive to do this or not, like I have this very specific memory from my college days of being at an REM concert, and being at that stage in life where, like, for me and the friends that I was with there, REM was the big band in our universe. So of course we were like intimately familiar with everything they'd ever released. We knew the backstories of things. We knew who their friends were, who the producer, we just like in a way that just was natural and that you wouldn't even give two thoughts about the fact that you knew this stuff. I remember we're at this show and there are these guys standing behind us who were...
It's a stalker-like quality, really.
Well, they were, yeah, perhaps. Something that, let's not go there, but...
Something you spent your spare time doing, stalking. Did you only stalk bands or did you stalk helpless individuals?
No, fortunately, my stalking was limited to fandom. I think is a more appropriate word. But the point of the story, Dave, I'm getting to in an extraordinarily long-winded and probably boring way. There were these two guys standing behind us.
That's what you told the officer?
At the show. These two old guys. They were old, Dave, by which I mean they might have been 40 or they might have been 24. But they were beyond our age, at any rate, so they were old. And it was very clear from like, you could hear their conversation because they were loud talkers that they were probably guys who at one point in their lives had that same kind of deep knowledge of music, but now were adults and didn't anymore. And they were talking, about REM in this very superficial way that like they liked them and they knew some stuff about them, but it was really limited. And I just remember, and my friend Matt, who is unfortunately no longer with us anymore, and I were kind of like laughing at them. And I just had this like, I never want to be those guys. I always want to have this same level of passion and knowledge for the music that I love. And of course, it disappeared, the second I graduated from college, pretty much. But I still have that memory. I still carry inside me that kind of, I got to see what Pitchfork is saying so I can listen to what's new. And I do, genuinely get real pleasure out of that from time to time.
That's true. And you mentioned the best of list, the yearly and 100 greatest artists and all that kind of stuff. When those lists come out, I know everyone knows they work and everyone looks at them, and I do too. I fall for them. I look at them. I disagree with them. And our friend Noah Shackman, during his time running Rolling Stone, had a lot of fun with some of the ones they did. Those do definitely have value. I will also respond to that thought of the geezers who were in their late 20s or whatever they were at the show.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember going to a concert in my 30s and walking in the door at Webster Hall, New York, and seeing some 20-somethings or teenagers or whatever it was looking at me like, oh no, there's geezers at the show. And I'm like, oh, damn it, I'm one of them now. I'm one of them.
I know. Well, now it's a thing. Like I'm very like, because most shows or many of the shows that I go to, you're looking for like, how narrow is the demographic, right? Because it's really cool when you go to like, I remember we went last year to a Decemberist show, and it really was like there were teenagers there, and there were people our age, and there were people older than us, and everybody was into this.
It was cool for you, but was it cool for the teenagers? Were they annoyed that you were there?
I think it's less of a bugaboo for them than it was for us at their age, but I might be wrong about that.
All right. Well, we better get to it. We've got our guest holding on the line for us. And first...
Before we do that, we have to do our business of reminding people that they have a moral responsibility to like us, subscribe to the podcast, follow our social media, shout from the rooftops, tell their friends and neighbors. Please don't let the show be a secret.
You mean you have an Atari video game system, but not Atari Missile Command?
Well, then you must have Defender. Great game. Or a challenge like Star Raiders. What about Yar's Revenge? You gotta have Berserk, right? And Atari Space Invaders, a classic.
You don't? Come on. An Atari system without those games? That's like having a stereo with no hit records.
All right, StupidGenXTricks is back, and it's guest time. Joining us today is Mark Richardson, currently the rock and pop music critic at the Wall Street Journal and director of curation at Third Bridge Creative. Mark was previously editor-in-chief and executive editor at Pitchfork, and has written about music and culture for the likes of the New York Times, NPR Music, The Ringer, and Stereo Gum. But, of course, most important of all, he grew up at 515 South Lawn in East Lansing, Michigan, and was nice enough to be close friends with a younger kid until he got to middle school. And that was me. And so I'm so happy to see you again. This is our first day of seeing each other since years ago, and really cool to have this opportunity to talk music, which is something we actually didn't talk when we were kids. So
thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for having me. I'm very, really excited to chat with you guys.
Fantastic. All right. So we have a question we always like to ask people, which is, what is the first record you ever bought?
So I remember
with your own money. That's the important stipulation.
Okay. Yes. I remember it very clearly because I actually still own it. And it was a vinyl copy of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run.
Yes.
I bought it in, we were chatting about this briefly before we got on, but I started really buying music and being obsessed with it later in life than some people. So I think I was probably 14 or 15 when I bought it. And I listened to my brother's records before that. But yeah, that was the first one that I went out and bought. And I still have that copy. And then a couple of years later, when CDs really swept through the world, that was the first CD I bought. So it must have been my first favorite album.
That's great.
That is
no
legit.
Tape. You didn't have a cassette too, just to round out.
No, my brother was kind of an audiophile and kind of schooled me on sound quality, and he was like, pre-recorded tapes are no good. So first it was vinyl, and then it was CD. We would take things for the car. Never really bought pre-recorded tapes. So I went right to vinyl.
Rick had an influence on both of us. I mean, obviously much more so you, but I remember following his lead into the world of running shoes and running, period. Mm-hmm.
Which was very big in the 70s, right? It was like a very much, there was that store called Frank Shorter Sports named after the runner. And it was just something that like books on running and waffle trainers and the whole idea of running as culture was like a brand new thing in the 70s, which is pretty interesting to think about.
It is. Now it's pretty ho-hum, but people still do it.
Yeah.
I actually always wondered, like, did people do it before then and it just wasn't like a thing that they talked about, or was the whole idea of running for exercise actually brand new?
I mean, my impression is that as something that the average person did to keep in shape, I think it was a fairly new idea. I mean, people ran, track, and marathons still existed. Right. And, but for the idea of just, the average person after work going for a run to stay in shape, I think that was happening in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, there was a very influential book by a writer and runner named Jim Fixx called, I think, The Complete Runner or something. And it became a bestseller, and running as a fad really, or as a thing in the culture, really grew from that. I think also it probably had something to do with Frank Shorter himself winning the gold in the Olympic marathon in 72. So there were like a number of things happening in the 70s where American long distance running was becoming prominent, and this book was published, and it kept on rising and rising. And weirdly, Jim Fixx went to Oberlin, and so I'd never met him or anything, but then in the 80s, he had a heart attack and died or something.
Right,
and it actually set the running world back a lot because, the guy who was like Mr. Fit and the proponent dropped dead of a heart attack, which was kind of off brand for being, in shape. Yeah. So anyway.
I come from people who run if somebody's chasing us, and that's our approach to life. But
yeah.
Well, Mark, you mentioned that you came to music later than some, and so in your home it was there wasn't much music. In my house there was a lot of music, but none of it was music I liked because my parents only listened to classical. My dad got into Motown and stuff much later in life, but so. Tell us a little bit about that journey from no music in the house to being a critic, who writes about music for your entire life.
Sure, yeah. So, really it all happened in high school. And, the arc of my music fandom in high school, obviously it was the days of MTV. So, I watched MTV a ton. It was the daily ritual after school. It was, if we were playing a board game or something, MTV would be on. And so I kind of kept up with what was happening there, and I heard the radio. But I think back then, if I had money, I had a paper route. I delivered the Lansing State Journal. And if I had money, I was more likely
to
put it. Yes, I was more likely to put my money in Atari cartridges, which, I was very into playing Atari and video games. And it's funny, but like an Atari cartridge was like $30, and that was 40 years ago. So for a 12-year-old, that was a lot of money. And So it wasn't until a little bit later, my brother beat me to being a big music fan by a couple of years, and he started collecting records. He was 2 years older than I was. And it was a kind of a quintessential older brother situation where he got into what I now recognize as very cool music, and he was playing things for me, and I was interested in what I was hearing. He liked Bruce Springsteen as well. And so it was kind of through hanging out in his room and hearing what he was interested in that I caught the bug enough to start buying some things. And I think early on, it's interesting because I listened to you guys chat in one of your first episodes. And, sometimes you join like a culture as a young person or a subculture where music is kind of one of the defining things of the subculture. And often for young people then and now, that involves going to shows, going to all ages shows, seeing bands play. And I never had that at all. For me, from the very beginning, my fandom was very intimately connected to records and music history. So right away when I was 15 or 16, I was buying music, but I was also interested in learning more about it. So I'd be buying record guides and books about artists, biographies, and so on. And the history part of it was interesting to me right from the very beginning. So even as I became a big music fan, I was buying like stacks, singles, box sets, and instead of, exploring punk rock like I should have been at age 16 or whatever.
Was there ever the drive to make music, or was it always on the, I want to learn about this and appreciate it? And at what point did the writing kick into that?
Yeah. So, when I was in college, I bought a guitar, and actually it was an interesting situation because, 3 or 4 of my closest friends also bought guitars. And so for us, hanging around, drinking beer, pull out the guitars and say, oh, hey, I learned this Pixies song. And, oh, cool, what are those chords? And then, oh, I actually wrote a little song. Let me play it for you guys. And like that, for probably 5 or 6 years of my life, that was very much part of socializing for me. It's just hanging around playing guitar with friends. But it never went from there to like, oh, we should form a band. It was like, we were all pretty comfortable with being at that level, and no one was dissing or anything. But it was never combined with I want to be in a band, really. And then just as far as the music writing part, in my late teens, kind of just became interested in writing fiction, and then just writing in general became more interesting to me. And really took a long time to connect my interest in writing, which was at the time was more about creative writing, with my interest in music. But later in my 20s, those things finally.
Did you have a Lester Bangs moment?
No, not really. It was, it actually, I was living in San Francisco, and myself and a close friend were very interested in the hip hop scene there. This was like 1996. And it was what they call turntablism, if you've ever heard that term. But it's basically
like DJ Shadow and
DJ Shadow was huge. Mm-hmm. And people associate with him, but it's like very heavy with like 4 guys on stage with turntables making music live, And I was like fascinated by it. And my friend was a web designer, and I was like, we should make a website, and we'll interview people and talk about shows we're going to. So that's what we did. And so that was kind of the start of writing about music for the first time. And then not too long after that, actually in 1997, there was an ad on Pitchfork. Hey, we're looking for writers. And that's how far I go back to Pitchfork, 1997. And so
when did it launch?
In 1996. So
okay.
You were really
just
on it at the beginning.
Stumbled upon it on the web when I was at work, and I sent him some clips from our website, and I thought that'd be cool to review records for free. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. That was 28 years ago.
Do you remember what your first review was?
I do. So it was now considered a classic record. I got very lucky. It was this band called Modest Mouse. And it was an album called The Lonesome Crowded West. So that was the first album I reviewed, which is like one of their classic albums for sure. So I'm just happened to hitch that one. I was a very big fan of it. And that was the first review there.
And how did writing about it and having it eventually become, not just review this record for free, but something that you were doing for a living, did it change your relationship to the music?
It did. It did. Yeah, it changes my relationship to music, mostly in good ways, I would say. I've just become very accustomed to thinking about what I'm hearing. And even if it's not something that I'm necessarily going to cover, if I hear catch something, I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. And then I'm like, where does that come from? What is this doing? Why is it interesting? And my mind just kind of like cycles through those kinds of questions as a form of habit. I think it's certainly deepened my music fandom. I'm also a record collector, and so I write about music that's brand new, but then my interest in music history and buying old records is there as much as ever. So yeah, but it certainly has changed it. No question about it.
Did you ever run into like R. Crumb collecting 78s?
I did not. No,
Okay.
It's interesting. Like I said, I love going to record shops and buying old records, but I'm not quite like a junk shop person. I was early on, like when you first, I was a CD guy from 1985 to 1998, maybe. And then for a long time after that. But in the late 90s, I bought a turntable for the first time since the early 80s, partly because records were cheaper. It's so weird now because they're 3 times the price. But back then it was like, the CD's $16 and you can get it on vinyl for $12. I'm like, okay.
And that was 98 was before really like the kind of hipster vinyl boom took off, right? I mean, you were on the front end of that by a good bit.
Oh, definitely. And so it was so inexpensive. And so that's when I started buying records. And when you first start collecting records, you're like, oh, cool. Here's a spoken word record about Wizard of Oz. I want to check that out. And you start like potting those up. And then after a while, you're like, I'm not like going to be sampling records and making albums. So I don't really need this stuff around. So I'm not really like an art chrome collector type where I'm sifting through junk shops to find treasure or anything like that.
Do you have any like holy grails of records you're looking for?
I kind of do. I definitely, for the most part, I don't spend a lot of money on an individual record. I know people who are like, oh, I'll spend $200 on like a original White Album pressing or something like that. And that's not me. Like, I'm always looking for just things to play. So I don't collect valuable records per se. But one record that I did have on my eye for a long time, which was pretty expensive, and I finally bought late last year, was Bob Seger back in 72, which is the album he released in 1973. And it's a really, really good album, but of course it reminded me of Michigan, it reminded me of home, but it was never issued on CD and never repressed. So he put it out in 73. A lot of people liked it. He was like, I'm done with that. And then a couple of years later, he did No Moves. So all his early albums, he's just not interested in. So because it was never issued digitally, it's not on streaming, it's not on CD, it's kind of valuable. And I did pay over $100 for that. So that was a holy grail for a while that I treated myself to last year.
So this kind of brings up the question that I will let you behind the scenes to know that this was what I wanted to focus the whole show on, and Dave thought it was too boring. But how do you balance? I mean, in your own listening life, this wanting to go back to things that that you love, and that like if I put on Imperial Bedroom, that's going to make me feel a particular thing, versus wanting to always find the new and get that sort of high of discovering something that you hadn't heard before, and particularly something that was maybe just made last month, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's partly when you said has writing about music for a living changed how I listen. It's kind of, I have this enforced schedule of keeping up with new music, whether I like it or not. And I do actually enjoy it quite a bit, but I wonder what would happen if nobody cared if I ever listened to new music again, and I didn't need to do it to earn a living. I mean, I think I would still continue to explore, but my new music consumption has been very intimately connected with getting 500 emails a day with promos for 20 years. So it's really just part of my routine now. But, it is fun to learn about new things. And I think that I like the balance that I have right now. For me, one of the signs I review about 50 records a year. I review an album a week for the Wall Street Journal. I might do a couple things for other places, maybe 55. And so I listen to, a few hundred other new albums a year, and which is, compared to a lot of people in my field, is not really very many. I write about plenty of things where I was like, I really enjoyed that. I listened to it 8 times. I reviewed it. I enjoyed it, and then I never listened to it again. That happens all the time,
Right.
And so then it's kind of, sometimes I could look back and like, did that actually mean anything to me? Or did I just enjoy it and think it was good? And it didn't become part of my life, So for me, when I write about something that I enjoy so much, it becomes part of my life, I usually buy a copy. And when I do that, it kind of enters my world, and I tend to play it more and return to it. And but there aren't that many a year that are like that, There might be 20 or 25. And then in a year I might buy 300 records or something, 250 records, most of which are older, but some of which might only be a few years old. So I kind of like.
What was the last new thing that you bought?
So the last new one I bought, I reviewed this album by a guy named Panda Bear, who's in this band called Animal Collective, and he had a new album that came out maybe a month ago, and I wrote about it. I thought it was really good. I've been writing about his music for more than 20 years, and so I was like, I'm going to buy this, because if I buy it, I'll put it on and I'm going to enjoy it. If I just try to remember that it's on Spotify, my chances of listening to it are.
And what's the most recent old record you bought?
I did buy this album by this guy named DJ Koze, who is a German producer and DJ who makes kind of indie-ish electronic dance music that I really like. And I bought his album, which I have trouble pronouncing. Sometimes you see it's not a German word, it might be actually Turkish, but you see it on an album cover for years, but I never spoken it aloud because I haven't had a conversation about it. But it's his record 2 albums ago, and I bought that very recently, so I think that.
We'll get some sound of a German speaker pronouncing it and just dub that in.
So we're being all respectful about you as a critic and as a observer of music, and you're clearly super thoughtful about it and come to it from a point of passion, which is nothing but awesome. On the other hand, critic bashing is a sport as old as the Olympics, probably older. Everyone loves to hate critics, and you're one of them. Do you take it personally? What would you say in the defense of music critics?
Yeah, so, over the years, I've definitely had a few situations where a lot of people disagree with review, piled on social media. It hasn't happened that many times, but it's certainly happened before. It never feels great, but I've also never, I don't take it personally. I feel like people are very passionate about music, and they're very emotional about how they respond to it and their favorite artists. And so it feels like kind of part of the job. I tend to think of music criticism in terms that it's not that far from you and I just talking about music here. And it's just that you have more of a formal process with it and way of thinking through and expressing your opinions and talking about why something works and why it's interesting and why it doesn't work. And I'm a really big believer in music and cultural criticism in general as a very valuable cultural product that has been diminished greatly maybe over the last 30 years probably, but especially the last 5.
How do you define that value? Because, right, for a lot of people, it's not just the criticism of he didn't like my record, right? It's the criticism of who the hell is Mark Richardson, or who the hell is, your favorite book reviewer or movie reviewer or whomever, to tell me what to like. And isn't the best thing just the thing that the most people like and the most people buy?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple parts to that. One is sometimes you do develop a trust with someone whose taste you really relate to. And,
Yeah.
I have friends, a lot of them are music writers, but they're like, oh, I think this is really good. I think you might like it. I'll just go buy it instantly. I'll just be like, cool. And then I'll just, I'll like go to the Bandcamp or whatever and just buy it. Like, it's almost always true, if I know who the person is and they know what I like. So, I have people like that in my life, but,
Yeah.
I think when I talk about criticism in general, I always say that you just simply having an opinion and stating it isn't really very interesting. And what I value most in criticism is being able to hear things in music that the way someone else hears it, and that kind of broadens my own understanding of the music. And I realize that many reviews don't do that or even try to, but that's kind of what I'm always shooting for, is that I'll tell you what I'm hearing and why I think it's interesting, and where it's coming from, and why it works and why it doesn't. And I just find that whole process of going through that, fascinating. Whether I'm doing it or whether I'm reading it by someone who's very good at practicing that. And to me, that has value in and of itself, even beyond, hey, here's a new album you might want to check out, which is also part of the job. But that's probably a less important part of the job now, because there are so many ways to get recommendations. And I honestly, I'm somewhat of the opinion that for most people, something like a Spotify or Apple Music saying, check this out, people found a lot of music they really like. And I think that's okay. That I don't feel like that's evil in and of itself. But so I have used those tools, and I do think of music criticism as a way of having that kind of experience, but I also think of it as just a way of communing with someone else's experience of music, and that in itself.
That's really nice. And Mark, I'm curious, talk for people who are listening or watching this podcast who haven't read your writing. I like how you're talking about what you're hearing in a record. What does that mean in the written word? Give an example of
Sure.
something you were hearing in a record.
Well, I think one of the reasons that this kind of framework for thinking about music writing is something I'm so interested in, is because for a long time, especially very early in my music writing career rather, if you ask somebody who read my writing between the years of 1998 and 2006, and it was kind of the years when I was doing a lot of it part-time, writing for Pitchfork a lot, also writing for weeklies and other places. And, but at that time I wrote a lot about experimental electronic music, which in some ways was an outgrowth of that early interest in turntablism. And so music by people like Aphex Twin and Autenker, Boards of Canada. If you've ever heard that kind of Warp Records, ambient, sometimes with beats kind of music. And I wrote about that music over and over because I loved it. And there was all the computer technology had created this time when you could do new things with sound that you hadn't been able to do before. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was just fascinated by it, and I loved writing about it. And I definitely met people who were like, I can't really write about instrumental music because I don't know what it's about, So I might be writing about this abstract sound called composition number 27. And it's what is this? And I'm so I would be saying, well, I can't say this is about, global warming or, it's just sound, but when I listen to it, I have emotional responses to it. So then I started saying why does this kind of sound or this kind of mix or this kind of texture make me feel a certain way emotionally. And I think that that kind of thing, I eventually was able to use that kind of thinking, whether it's about like the bass line in an Aretha Franklin song. It's like, oh, the bass line is actually kind of this jazz bass line played by this guy. Brit suggests the nightclub, while her piano playing suggests gospel music, and there's this interesting tension between those things, and that kind of gives you an emotional feeling. So it's like that's what I mean when I say writing about sound and how I hear things. Like, on the one hand, you could just say Aretha Franklin, she's a great artist, she's from Detroit, her father was a Baptist minister, she grew up in the church. Like, there's all these facts about who she is and her life, but there's also like, what does this sound like? How is it put together? How are these, musical components combined in a way that, make people feel things? And that's just, that part of it's been interesting. That's kind of what I'm talking about when I say this. And I think that's kind of what differentiates it from just like analyzing the content, you could say.
Right. And it's not like this gets 3 stars out of 10 and this gets 4 stars out of 10. It's this is what makes it work. Yeah, it's great. So can we go back a little bit? We started out and we talked about the beginnings of Pitchfork and your relationship with it. But talk about, being able to kind of ride this train to it becoming the most influential publication in the music world for a while. And then, if you've got anything potentially viral to say about what's happening with it now, we would love to have you do that too.
Well, so when I started writing for it, I don't think if it had ads, it barely started having ads. And think of what a banner ad, was paying on a website in 1977. It was a lot of money. So Ryan Schreiber, who's now a friend, and, he started in his bedroom, literally when he was 19. And he was very inspired by like the zines and of that time, as well as like writing that was in the weeklies and Spin. And he had this vision of, basically he's just somebody who kind of saw web publishing and was like, wow, this is going to change things. You can put it up there and anybody in the world can look at it. It's a very new idea. And so that got him started, and I became involved early on. And in the early days, I wrote for free. I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. And it was really more about trying to be funny and trying to make people laugh. And it was fun thinking about and experiencing new music, but there was a strong element of we're just kind of joking around, which is a whole tradition in
you guys were
culture.
snarky, very snarky.
It was snarky. It was just like, let's have fun with it, like no one's getting any money. Might sell CDs for $2 a piece. That was your payment.
There were people who said crueler things than snarky, but we can leave that aside now.
There was. And I, in my mind, there, kind of like the core culture of music writing in general, there's always been this kind of undercurrent of anger going through it, I guess you could say. And, if you have anger and humor coming out, it's going to be destructive.
Which wasn't new there. I mean, you could see it in NME and Melody Maker.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, in the 80s, reading these reviews of, either a new record or a live performance where I was like, what did I just read? They just wrote some stuff, and I don't know who the band is. I don't know if they played any songs. It's like a complete riff on randomness. It was clearly a performance by the writer.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. And that was very much in the mix in the early days of Pitchfork. And I think by the early 2000s, it was a fairly gradual process of becoming a little bit more professional. Ryan making a little bit of money, making it his full-time job, paying people a little bit. And it was so let's say 2003, it was already quite influential. I mean, if you look back at around 2000, there were 20 Pitchforks, literally. There were many other websites that were very similar. They covered indie music. They reviewed 3 records a day. But they kind of fell away, and Pitchfork kept growing. And they had a few good writers that were very entertaining and people liked reading. And so, by the time of 2003, it was pretty darn influential. And then in 2004 is really when Ryan hired his first full-time employees. A guy named Chris Kasky was the president first. He eventually became president. He was the money guy at Pitchfork from 2004 to about 2017. And then this guy, Scott Blagenhoff, who was the first full-time editor, who now works at Apple. And then it took quantum leap in 2004, because now Scott was an experienced editor. They got a guy, overseeing the money part. And now those things were Ryan's forte. So that's when it really started taking off. And like, whenever you hear the stories of like Pitchfork made this band and changed their career and or destroyed their career, that really all started in 2004. That was the beginning of like professional years.
And what the Arcade Fire and Radiohead were some key.
Yes. So Kid A came out in 2000, and that was Pitchfork's review was, widely read, widely mocked, but also kind of, I feel it sort of sneakily admired as well. But it was just completely over the top. It was like written like nobody had ever seen this kind of writing before. This guy, Brent DiCrescenzo, who's, when I said there were some very entertaining writers that people love following, he was definitely the main one. He's very funny. He later wrote for television, and he's just a super funny guy who also knew a lot about music, and he knew how to put these reviews together that were just like wildly entertaining, and people loved reading him. So his beat style was a very big part of their early success too.
And that's one, I have to say, like, it's not an album that I love personally that much, but it's one that definitely people look to as like one of the highlights of that era. So by that standard, at least, you got it right.
Yep, definitely. I mean, I think it's hugely important record, no doubt about it. And that was like,
did that come before Paranoid Android, or OK Computer, or after?
It was the one after.
Okay.
OK Computer was 97, and Kid A was 2000.
Remember being at MTV when the advance of OK Computer arrived at the office. Did you see these things? Did you guys get one?
It was familiar. I wasn't writing about music then, really.
Oh yeah, it was the craziest thing. Like, we got Advanced Records. At MTV, they got every single thing, right?
Yeah.
And no one freaked out about any of it except for like the Madonna guys, and whatever. Like, but everyone crowded around the desk where this thing had gone to Dave Cerelnik, the head of MTV News, and they were opening it and all oohing and ahhing. And it was a Walkman that had been painted white with like Kid A art and glued shut. You could not take the cassette out. The headphones were glued in, so you couldn't get an audio out to
that is genius promotion.
Oh, it was, yeah. It was like they knew it was hot, and then the presentation upped the game, and everyone wanted to hear it, and they were like fighting over the headphones. And if I could have one collectible from music, it would be that Walkman with OK Computer in it.
I'm sure it's worth thousands of dollars now.
Yeah, it was very cool. Anyway, I sent us way off topic there with that, but I'm curious whether you could give us a few essentials from this year, maybe 3 that like you think are must listens.
Sure. Well, let's see. One of my reviews actually coming out tomorrow in the Wall Street Journal. And it's the new Bon Iver record. It's called Sable Fable. So if you've ever listened to his music, he's from Wisconsin. He started making music in 2007 with this project. And just somewhat of a return to like some of his folkier stuff in the late 2000s. Definitely more produced than his first album, but he's kind of always moving between these extremes of playing folk songs on his guitar with his very distinctive voice to, in a Radiohead Kid A way, you could say, like shredding it all to pieces and reassembling it and having this electronic noise. And I like all those sides of his music, but this one definitely leans towards the song-oriented side. It's really nice. It's great. And then I mentioned this guy, DJ Koze, And a couple of weeks ago, actually it was just a week ago, another great album from him called Music Can Hear Us. I really love that title.
Great title.
And
Great.
if you've ever listened to the Avalanches, that's one comparison point. So his music is kind of like the Avalanches, more like indie pop, you could say. This one has like Damon Albarn on the track, and probably 7 or 8 songs. 12 have guest vocalists. So it's really, really amazing. Just a beautiful, like, drumming record. And then a few weeks ago, I interviewed a record that I like a lot. This artist called Japanese Breakfast. That maybe your kids like, that she's her music is popular with teenagers as well as people like me. And
I've got the new single as my first track on my latest Spotify list. So yes.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So her album for Melancholy Brunettes is Sad Women. I really enjoyed that. Produced by this guy named Blake Mills. It's very like Baroque chamber pop kind of sound and really beautiful production. And those 3 kind of stand out. I guess we're only 3 months into the year, but all records I enjoyed a great deal, and we'll return to for sure.
That's great. I love that
awesome.
you put a light on Cat Stevens recently too. That's
That was a great piece.
Yeah.
What was the content of that? Was that I reviewed Harold and Maude.
It was the Harold and Maude soundtrack. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it's like I don't often get excited about. I mean, he knows he runs Cat Stevens' Twitter account. Probably not Cat Stevens, but so he did like share that review and say, "Great review, Mark. I love this." And I was like, "Oh, cool." Cat Stevens like
That's cool.
Harold and Maude review, And it was so fun to read that. I'm talking about like Gen X classic stuff.
Yeah.
Harold and Maude is a absolute gem of a movie, and not one that would probably be made anymore.
No, that's for sure.
No, but I really actually I loved in the piece how you sort of captured that it was not like it didn't hit with the boomers when it came out. It was only when like our cohort came along and were cooler with death obsessed weirdos or whatever that
it had a sensibility that was kind of ahead of its time. It didn't feel like 1972 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's kind of goth or straight up goth. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being on. Just a reminder again to the listeners: please like us, please subscribe. We're begging you to help.
Are we
help
like
us move this thing
begging?
forward?
Is that what we're doing?
I am. I can't speak for you.
Okay, yeah, I'll be sure. I'm right there with you, David. We're a team.
There you go. But Mark, thank you.
Take care,
Thanks, guys. You bet.
I would be honored if you and Sadie Ann visited my home.
Now there are special Cabbage Patch Kids called World Travelers, and they come dressed in the clothes of the country they like best.
Reverse, please.
Here they are.
They all have official U.S. passports with their own numbers.
Cabbage Patch Kids.
And all World Travelers come with special clothes, tote bag, T-shirts, and travel information.
Looks like you.
All right. Well, we are back. Thank you again to Mark Richardson, childhood buddy, appearing on our show to talk about his fascinating life as a music critic. And
to put you in your place for your dismissal of Bruce Springsteen on our first episode, and it's just good to see that there were people in East Lansing who recognized what was right there in front of them.
Absolutely. Yes, the world, well, I've come around to Bruce, of course, but not nearly quickly enough. It was so interesting to listen to this person that I knew when I was a kid, when he's a fully formed, life experienced adult. Like that only happens at like reunions and stuff. And it's really like, I find it quite magical. I mean, sometimes it's disappointing. Like people grow up to become, not what you might have hoped, or not as interesting as you remembered them, or whatever. But he's like great, so interesting, so thoughtful. And it was especially interesting to me where my view of Pitchfork and the writers for that was that they were snarky and like too clever by half at times, and he was just a very low key and measured and very thoughtful music observer. And that was, I guess I sort of expected it, but it was nice to hear it for real.
It was nice to hear. I loved his description of how good criticism works, which applies not just to music, but to everything, of just this idea of this is what the sound does for me, and this is how I think they got there. I wouldn't have ever articulated it that way, but I think what I'm always looking for when I read a movie review beyond like, should I go waste $15 on this or not, is like, what's it do and how does it get there? It's a great assessment. So
yeah, his
really
deconstruction of like Aretha Franklin was so beautiful. Yeah. And I think about this when I listen to really accomplished writers I'm like, oh, just listen to them talk. Listen to that. It's like they, like that. What was that David Sedaris record or book, like Me Talk Pretty One Day? It's like they just talk pretty. It's such a joy. It's like hearing a great musician play music beautifully. A great writer or author talking with their sort of trademark thoughtfulness and insight it's a treat.
Yeah. Absolutely. So now let's talk about Wormholes and just drag it down to like the lowest possible level here.
So I think this is a special edition. We agreed to tell people about some places we've been recently and look for wormholes that are relevant to those locations. Of course, by the time this airs, it'll be like 2 months or something after we were in those places.
They won't know that. We don't have to talk about the timeline. We can just say we were there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Back when the Bon Iver record was coming out Friday.
I guess we are dated a little bit.
Yes, well, that's okay. So I went to Boston and New York with the kids over spring break, and you went to a balmy Hollywood haven. Let's hear about it.
Well, I was not in Hollywood. I was in Palm Springs, as you know, hanging out with some mutual friends of ours. You were missed. But I had a thing that I learned about, that Palm Springs has, like Hollywood, because it obviously has been a hangout for Hollywood celebrities for many years, has its own walk of fame.
And where Coachella began. And remains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remains. Has its own little thing where they have stars on the sidewalk, commemorating various people, and it's an honor. And so I was looking at the list of who's on this, and of course there's a lot of actors and they actually honor some Congressional Medal of Honor winners, which is a very cool thing that they did, and, various other local people. But the musician section, like there's a lot of musicians on there. There's, various members of the Sinatra family, and so only one musical act, and this is going to be a quiz, Dave. There's only one musical act on there who had its heyday during our lifetime. There were others who were still going in our lifetime, but had their day earlier on. Who is the one act commemorated on the Palm Springs, I think it's called the Walk of Stars or something like that, that was at its peak while you and I were alive?
While we were alive? Like, is this the past tense? Okay, you mean like in the 90s or something?
No, just definitely not the 90s, which is a little bit of a hint, I guess. Post whatever years we were born in, post 1970, let's say, yeah.
Cher.
No, although she must be on there actually too. I would think Sonny certainly is, obviously, since he was the mayor and all. But I think of him as his heyday was the 60s. And I don't know. Anyway, the one that leaped out on me, so maybe I was wrong about the premise, but the one that leaped out on me as the biggie, of course, was Casey and the Sunshine Band. Because those people know how to get down boogie oogie oogie. So that is my wormhole.
That is outstanding. Well, you are celebrating life and great music, and my wormhole, I will confess, I did not discover it while we were in Boston. I discovered it after, but it was fun to like go on the Freedom Trail and see Paul Revere's house and look at the grave that was supposed to be the real Mother Goose, but then I found out there is no Mother Goose, so I don't know what that was all about. But anyway, old graves, crypts.
Geese don't write children's stories.
It says Mother Goose on her grave, but I guess she's not it. I don't know what that's all about. But anyway, I love old stuff. I love, like, my mom and I used to go to cemeteries to see who could find the oldest tombstone. It was this running thing. And Mom won overall with a tomb in Boston that was from the 1600s years ago. I've never topped that. Anyway, but what I learned later was that the Puritans, you know, not necessarily the most open-minded folks, and with their own history of awfulness in the New World there in Massachusetts, you know, burning witches and all, they also executed Quakers. Did you know that? Puritans.
I did not know that, although it certainly seems on brand.
Yeah, they killed my people. I mean, we weren't Quakers till like, you know, the 60s, but, you know, whatever. So there were the Boston Martyrs from 1660. Quakers were basically outlawed by the Puritans, and I guess the Puritans were in charge of Massachusetts before the English were in charge of Massachusetts. That's basic history that people who were history majors like me ought to all know, but I somehow did not know or forgot about it. But they outlawed the Quakers. Like, if you're a Quaker, you had to get out of town, and these Quakers just kept coming back, and they killed them. They executed them.
Well, and then
yeah, the Boston Martyrs. Mary Dyer. There's a painting of her just as she's about to get taken out by Puritans. And then there's also a guy named Marmaduke Stevenson. I'm just glad to know that someone besides that dog had the name Marmaduke, even if he did.
Was he also very tall?
I don't know. I didn't see any imagery of him. There were no daguerreotypes in the 1600s. So, yeah.
But then, the Quakers then got their own state, right, here in Pennsylvania, where I currently reside.
Yes.
Yes.
Where I went to high school.
And was it as a refuge, or was it just, you know, like William Penn got a grant and made it his place?
Well, it was like, it wasn't just a grant. It was like the king owed him money, and that's how he paid him off. The King of England gave him Pennsylvania, and then they went about their Quaker ways in Pennsylvania with public schools, Quakers, public hospitals, Quakers, and other cool things that Quakers did over the years. Suffragettes, and Lucretia Mott went to my high school. So
very cool.
Yeah, good stuff. Good Quaker stuff. The ones that weren't getting killed.
I could apologize on behalf of the Puritans, but I don't really think I'm empowered to speak for them somehow.
Yeah. Were there any Jewish Puritans? I didn't hear of any.
Well, by definition, no, although we used to actually joke that my mother was the original Jewish Puritan because of her sternness about certain things. But anyway,
nice.
That brings us, I think, to the end here. Just to remind people, we will have a new episode publishing just 2 weeks after this one does, if you're listening to us in real time, or if this is now like 2029 and you're going back through our back catalog, you can just click right on ahead to the next one. We're going to be talking about parenting, Gen X parenting, both what we experienced as kids and what we're doing as parents now, with our old friend, author Ashley Merriman, who has written a lot about parenting, about leadership, all sorts of interesting things. And so looking forward to that conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you all for watching us, taking the time, and like the influencers say, smash that subscribe button, comment, like, share, do all the things, and give us feedback, because we want to hear what you think and what you want to hear from, and suggest some guests and all those things.
And pretty soon we're going to stop begging and start threatening. So,
yes, we're going to.
For now, though, thank you very much.
All right. Good night and good luck.